This story I'm doing today is Killer Cousins, David Alan Gore and his cousin Fred Waterfield. This was recommended by one of my subscribers, and I looked at it and sort of put it to the side because I was looking at some other things and then decided to come back to it. This was set in July 26th of 1983. This was in Florida, and it was summertime, and of course the air was thick and oppressive. A 17-year-old girl named Lynn Elliott is running barefoot. Her hands are bound. Her face is etched in terror. Behind her is David Alan Gore, serial predator. He was a sheriff deputy that was using his badge to commit these awful crimes that he committed. And there was a gun in his hand. Within seconds, the quiet neighborhood at Vero Beach, Florida, would witness a murder. One person, a boy riding his bike, would witness the murder that unravels one of the most chilling partnerships in Florida's history. Welcome to Crime Diaries with Nicole Grigg, and of course this is the case of David Alan Gore and his cousin Fred Waterfield. They were called the Killing Cousins. They did, there was a span of 6 murders that were committed, and possibly even more that were never uncovered. We'll go over that later in depth. And also a couple survivors, and one story that is just one of the survivors that happened even before the 1983 crime spree began. This was like in the 1970s, I believe 76. This lady, the story and what she went through with David Alan Gore and his cousin Fred Waterfield was horrifying too. So just remember, this is for educational purposes only, and I get all my stuff off the internet, looking this up like anybody could. So today we're stepping into the twisted and disgusting world of 2 men, which we've already spoke with David Alan Gore and Fred Waterfield. These men were not only tied by blood, seriously tied by blood, not just by being cousins, but tied by blood, by the murders. These killers had their reign of terror in the 1980s that left 6 women dead and families mourning and shattered with their killings. So who was David Alan Gore? He was born August the 21st, 1953 in Florida. And he grew up with a troubled home environment. And from a young age, he had developed some troubling, disturbing tendencies. It included animal cruelty and obsession, people said, with fixation on women. His cousin, Fred Waterfield, was born 9/29 of 52. He was the opposite. He was a football high school star, clean-cut image. But behind closed doors, when them two got together later, their dark fantasies come out and spilled over into tragic events. In February of 1981, the cousins abducted their first victims. It was a mom. Her name was, if I can get this right, Hsing Hungling. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Hsing Hungling, 48, and her daughter that was 17, Ying Hu Ling, 17. They used Gore's law enforcement to his badge as bait. Yes, law enforcement. Can you believe that he was in the law enforcement? Someone that goes to kill 6 women and possibly even more. It later shows that piece of crap of a so-called cop. They lured the daughter first and kidnapped the murderer using his badge. Both the mom and the daughter were brutally murdered, dismembered, and their remains were hidden out in oil drums. Over the next 2 years, the cousins' violence escalated. Gore would use his deputy position and stalk and abduct women. Some of their victims were Judith K. Daly, Barbara Ann Beyer, Angelica Lavelli. They were all caught in the cousins' traps. They were murdered, and these murders were planned out, and some involved hours of torture before they were killed. Then on July 26, 1983, Gore abducted Lynn Elliott, who was 17, and her friend Regan Martin, who was 14. While Gore was distracted, Lynn made a desperate flee. He took them back to his home and in broad daylight, and she made this flee from him, and he ran after her and shot her in the street. As one of the neighbors, it was a young boy that was on a bike. He saw the event, seen her get shot a couple times. Then he drug her back in the house to finish killing her. This boy turned this into called the cops. He went home and called the cops. And that's when the cops came to his home. And before they even got here, the 17-year-old was taken up to the attic to hide her. And the cops came and they ended up searching the house. They ended up finding her still alive. So she was one of the few that did escape. And they found other victims' items. They found gun, rope, and handcuffs, just several items that were used as evidence against him, of course. But again, 2 survivors did end up out of their grasp. One was Reagan that we just talked about. That was the 14-year-old. And then there was one, Angela. And this happened in 1986. And I watched this podcast about her and the events that happened. This story is just chilling. So I'll recall it back to you. Angela was not from this country. Angela Hamel, if I'm saying that right, she was from Germany. And she was 19 when she got married, and had moved to the States with her husband. They had met was over there in Germany, and they had met there and had come back. So she was actually on a green card. And they moved here. Their marriage wasn't the best. He was one who known to run around. He just wasn't a good husband. Their marriage was on the rocks. She started working. She had said that she did not want to completely be dependent on him. She wanted, separate money, and she worked. Well, one day she come home and her husband said, I have somebody I want you to meet. His name's Fred Waterfield, and he's a mechanic. And in case you ever get a flat tire or something happens to you, I want you to call him. So Angela was like, I know how to change a tire. So he wanted her husband to meet Fred. And so she went into the living room, shook his hand, and was like, hi, I'm, his wife. And she just said seemed awful off, strange. And so she went to bed after that. And it wasn't but a couple days later, she said she was, her husband had gone on to work, and she was getting ready to go to work herself, went outside, and 2 of her tires, the back tires, were flat. And so she went in and she phoned her husband, and she said, I've got 2 flat tires. Do you think you can get off work and come and pick me up, take me to work? Because I don't have 2 spares. And fix them, so, and then go back to work. And he was like, call Fred. And she's like, why do we have to call him? We can do this ourselves. And she's like, I don't have his number. And he's like, I left it in the kitchen for you, so call him. So again, she, had warning bells going off, and she said, but I, did what he asked. And she called Fred next, and she's like, my husband told me to call you. I've got 2 flat tires. Was wondering if you can come and fix them. I know you're probably busy. And he's like, no, I'll be right there. And she said, okay. And she thought that was suspicious too, but she just went with it. And he came, and he told her, he said, I'll just take you to work, and then I'll come back and I'll fix the tires. And she's like, oh, okay. That would save time. So they started out on the trip, and they went by the road that normally she would take to go to work. And she's like, well, we just went past the road. And he's like, well, I know some shortcuts up here, just up here. And she's like, well, maybe he does. She was newer to the area. She didn't know everything. She's like, okay. Went on a little bit more. And then he said, well, I'm going to stop at the store over here. And she's like, well, I'm pushed for time, but okay. So he went in the store, and he came back out, and he had a big brown bag. When he came out of the store with the brown bag, he pulled out, when he got in the car, he pulled out some alcohol. And then he brought out another one, and he's like, here you go. You want to drink this? And she's like, I don't drink. And he's like, well, that may change. And so he drank, and they started up again. And by this point, she said she was getting really nervous. And they kept driving, and she thought, this is just really out of the way from where it seems like where my work should be. And she was explaining on the podcast I listened to that when they were going on the road in Florida, they had these, on the sides of the road, were like big waterways or something, like on the sides of the road. And then there's a lot of marsh and alligators. And they were driving, and he had said something to her about drinking and trying to give her that too. And he took his eye off the road, and he sort of ran off the road into one of those gully-like type things. And at that point, he was like, well, look what you made me do. And she said, well, maybe we can push it out. And he's like, no, there's alligators and all this. And so that did scare her too. And he said, well, right down this road, it's like orange field. She said, orange. He said, my cousin is working down there. We'll just go down there and get him, and he can help us. And she said, well, she was going to stay right there, but it was so hot in the car. And she thought, well, maybe there'll be other workers there, and I can talk to somebody else and maybe get a ride with them, because at this point she was really creeped out. Like, I've had it enough of him. He's too creepy. So they walked a little piece down there, and they came up on Alan Gore, who was like there, but there wasn't other workers. And there was a car, and they were like, let's get in the car. And they didn't say it like really, really like nice at all. And she said that to a point, she just knew something was not right. But she didn't know what to do. They ended up telling her to get in the car. She got in the car, and she said, maybe if I just listen to them and cooperate, they'll. So once they were in the car, it was Fred that reached into the glove department and brought the gun out. And it's been said through the trials that Fred claimed that he was not really a part of these murders or took a big part in the crime that Alan Gore did. But this right here, Angela, proved that he had a big part in more than a lot of people, more than he was claiming. And this was in 1976. This was before the actual murder started in the 80s. But he held a gun to her, and he told her to take her top off, and she refused at first. But he had the gun, and he had bullets. I mean, she knew it was loaded. So she did what he wanted, and then she just went into detail, stuff that I'm not exactly comfortable going through, but he was trying to like perform. He had trouble. He was asking for her help, told her he'd shoot her if she didn't. And then, of course, David Alan Gore was also after him, was a part of sexual assault. And she just thought, if I can get through this and get back, she said, I won't tell anybody. And that's when, I think it was David who said, you're not going anywhere and you're not going to make it back. Or Fred said that, actually, I'm sorry. Fred said, you're not going to make it back. You're not going anywhere. Well, so Fred had all intentions right then to kill her, she said. She just knew he had all intentions. She said both of him and David Gore had this awful look in their eyes, like predators, like maniacs during this. That was so scary. And it's been said that other victims explained the same thing about them too. And then Fred, he was talking about, she wasn't going to make it back. He was going to kill her. It was actually David at that time that said he actually stopped it. She just decided, Angela, she started saying, I'm from Germany. I have some big contacts. I have a green card. And I think she said my dad is like a big person over there. And they're going to know if I miss him. They're going to come looking for me because I'm not legal yet in this state. So it scared, I think, David. And he said he felt like he needed to let her go. And Fred didn't want to. But they told her she wasn't to say anything, and they drove her back and dropped her off. And she explained, there was more details in this podcast. If you get a chance to listen to it, it is more detailed and some horrible things she went through with them too. And when they dropped her off, she said, she just felt so dirty. She wanted to take a shower. She ended up calling her husband to tell him what happened. And when she answered, he was like surprised. He's like, where are you? And when she said home, he said, you're at home? And that right there, she was like, what? She knew he had to have had something to do with this. And she told him what had happened, and he said, I'll be home. So he came home, and he told her, he said, we've got to go to the hospital. And she's like, no, I'm too embarrassed for this. I really don't want to go. So she ended up going to the hospital, and she described how everybody she encountered, the doctors, the police, they were all on, especially the Fred and David side. They were talking about, oh, Fred is a good guy. He's just a good guy in our county. And David's a policeman. And are you sure this really happened? Are you sure? And she just couldn't believe that they did not believe her story. And when it did go to court, they ended up asking her, did you voluntarily help Fred with anything like during this episode in the back car? And she's like, I was forced to do everything with a gun. But they ended up dropping it. They ended up not finding enough evidence. And so that was probably their first known victim. And that was several years. That was 76 before their 80s when they started their crime spree. When the murder case was heard, when the cases were heard in court, Gore confessed, before he even went to court, Gore confessed to the 6 murders. But he hinted to as much as possibly 30 murders that he may have committed, him and Fred, or that he admitted to. In 1984, Gore was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. While David was in prison, while Fred was in prison, there was a Fred Rosen who actually did some interviews with him and what they call letters, and he told the writer that it was never about sex. When he was after these women, it was the hunt, it was the power, the possession that it was all about. David Alan Gore was executed April 12th, 2012 by lethal injection. Fred Waterfield still remains in prison under several life sentences. This crime, I mean, using his police experience and his badge, was a terrible crime, and I'm glad he paid, but there was sisters, mothers, daughters lost. Tell me your thoughts on this story, and if you can, hit like and subscribe to Crime Diaries with Nicole Grigg. Thank you for joining in, and see you next time on my next case. Thank you.